the United States of America beats each one of these four countries hands down. And not only that, it beats all of them collectively. Now, the next information that you are going to get is perhaps going to be one of the most important pieces of information you will get on my channel. This Chaitanya Sambhara, faculty at the College of Business, University of Texas, Arlington. So what has been happening is that for a while, a number of students are debating with me, arguing that the US is no longer the place to go and instead they should go to Canada, Germany, UK or Australia. And the reason they said is that US has a lot of issues, for example, immigration issues and then difficult to get jobs, maybe healthcare issues and whatnot. So that got me interested, and then I decided to examine how exactly are these countries comparing with one another. So I started collecting data and I came up with some very interesting insights, and this can be shocking and eye-opener for you. If you are considering deciding between studying in the US versus Canada, UK, Germany and Australia, and if you are confused, this is a video that will really help you. First thing first, most of my data came from Labor Department's websites from 5 different countries, and I'd really try to be as accurate as possible. However, I cannot guarantee that my numbers and graphs represent absolute truth. So please, if you find any errors in my data or my graphs, kindly write that in your comments and I will add that to the description. So let's get started. First thing first, this is the data that I came up with. And because the data came from a number of websites, I'm not including all the sources. However, if you have any doubts, just Google that and let me know what you see. So first thing first, let us look at the population of the United States when compared to these 4 countries: Canada, Australia, Germany and UK. And if you look at the collective population of these countries, you will see that the United States is still 1.5 times larger than all these countries combined. It is important for one simple reason. See, the size of the country really determines the number of opportunities that people in that country can get. If it is a small country, let's say a small country like Sri Lanka, how many industries can it have? Does Sri Lanka produce any of its own cars? It does not. It imports all its cars. Therefore, all the small countries for most part depend on imports from other larger countries. It is not to say that large countries do not import, but usually larger countries import raw materials so that they can produce whatever products, or even though they import some things from other countries, but their own domestic capabilities are also very high. For example, because of the size benefit that the United States has over all these countries, it has more number and variety of industries within its boundaries, which means that the people of this country also have larger variety of jobs to get into. Now, our second basis for comparison is the number of foreign-born workers that are in the country at the moment. The United States beats Canada, Australia, Germany and UK hands down. The United States has nearly 9 times as many foreign-born workers than rest of these countries combined. Now let us look at the number of jobs that are there in each of these countries. The United States alone has 156 million jobs. Now please understand that this might not be a true reflector of jobs, because a good number of jobs are student workers. Whether you're a company CEO or a 16-year-old working at Walmart, it does not matter. The total number of jobs in the US are 156 million. As compared to that, look at Canada, Australia, Germany and UK. The highest number of jobs that are there are in Germany. However, collectively, all these 4 countries put together, the US still has more than 1.6 times the number of jobs, and that should be revealing to some extent. Now, this number that I presented may or may not be accurate because there were a lot of job losses because of this COVID situation. However, they reflect the overall general reality. Now let us look at our next criteria, which is the job openings. The United States at the moment has 6 million job openings, followed by Germany, which has 1.2 million. Now, if you put all these other countries together, again, the United States has more than twice as many jobs as all these countries put together. Now, our next criteria is going to be quite interesting. It is the ratio of the number of openings to the number of jobs that are already there. Now, if you look at this statistic, if 100 people are employed in the United States, 3.85% jobs in addition are also available. In this regard, Australia is performing the worst and other countries are more or less close to the US. However, the United States still beats all these countries. Now let us look at the number of universities that are there in each of these countries. As you can see, the United States has 3,300 universities and colleges, and in compared to the US, all these countries are much smaller. By the way, just a trivia, do you know which country has the most number of universities? It is India. When it comes to universities and colleges put together, India has a lead over the United States by 1,000 universities and colleges. Now getting back to our number of universities, all these four countries put together still have around 1/3 the number of universities that the United States has. Now let us look at the number of international students in each of these countries. Now this is a very interesting statistic, as we saw that United States has far more universities than Canada, Germany, UK and Australia. But when it comes to the number of international students, all these four other countries have a very sizable population. As you can see, the US has 1 million international students. However, Australia, such a small country by population, has more than 800,000 students. If my information is correct, after coal industry, Australia's biggest contributor to its GDP was its universities. Now, how is it that when you compare in terms of population of these countries, Australia is admitting far more international students than US and other countries do? See, in the US, there is a certain priority for in-state applicants. However, in Australia, as long as you meet a certain criteria, you will get admitted regardless of where you are from. Australia has a strong culture of bringing in international students and charging them fee and improving their economy based on the students and the tourism that it brings along. Now, it is quite interesting to notice that in spite of their populations, all these countries put together admit 2.5 times more international students than the United States does. Now, that said, our next statistic is going to be very interesting. The US admits fewer students than any of these other countries. In fact, US admits only about 332 students per university. And look at what is Australia doing. On average, every Australian university has more than 4,500 students, which is far higher than the US. Now, if you look at it collectively, rest of these countries admit 5.7 times more students than the US does. Therefore, it could be relatively easier to get admitted in a university in Australia, Canada, UK and Germany. Now, the next information that you are going to get is perhaps going to be one of the most important pieces of information you will get on my channel. Look at the potential job opportunities for each international student. Now, let me clarify that these numbers may not necessarily reflect the absolute truth. The problem was with the quality of data I could get. The data that I could get was the total number of job opportunities per citizen. However, there are good number of jobs that are exclusively available for local candidates where you have to be a citizen or a green card holder, and international students are not eligible to apply for those jobs. But I did not have the data to differentiate between jobs where international students could also apply and where only local candidates could apply. Therefore, although this might not be absolutely accurate, but it still should give you a very good indication of where things stand. Now, in theory, for each international student in the US, there are approximately 5.5 jobs that they can apply to. However, when it comes to other countries, in Germany, for example, one student can apply to at most 3 jobs that are available to be applied for. And look at Australia and Canada, they are doing far worse. And no wonder why, because in Australia, you have local candidates applying for jobs and you have far more international students to compete with those small number of jobs. And remember, the population of Australia is very small. The population of Australia is only 25 million, which is 2.5 crores. So how many jobs can they even generate? Now, when you have such large number of international students, each student can at best apply to only 0.27 jobs. Now, even with all these countries put together, the US has a lead of almost 5 times, which may in theory mean that you are 5 times more likely to get a job in the US than all these countries put together. Now that is not a reflection of reality, because you are not competing in all these countries for a job together. You are in one of these countries and the competition can change. For example, if you're in Germany, the competition could be slightly lesser because there are slightly more number of jobs available. However, if you are in Canada or Australia, the struggle is real. Now let us look at the number of companies that each of these countries have. The US has around 5.6 million companies, and all these countries are actually not doing bad for the population that they have. Now put together, the rest of these countries have 1.3 as many companies than US. That said, this is not the reflection of reality. The reality is that in Australia, for example, 61% companies do not have any employees, which means that any person can start their own company and call it a company. Therefore, now if we look at the companies that have at least 100 employees, let us look how these countries compare. More than 1 lakh companies in the US that have at least 100 employees. Now, how do these other countries compare? What we see is that all these countries are much smaller when it comes to slightly larger companies. In fact, all these countries put together, the United States still beats them all by a margin of 1.7. Now, you may say that there could be startups in other countries that can have less than 100 employees, but you can get a job in those startups, right? Therefore, let us look at the startup scene. According to the Startup Outlook survey, what we see is that the United States has 59% of all the startups in the world. It is followed by China. However, we are not considering China in our criteria because China does not attract as many international students that these other countries do. So even when you look at the startup scene, United States beats all these countries put together, hands down. United States has almost 60% of all the startups. And obviously, most of these startups are technology companies followed by healthcare companies. So even if you are looking for a job in a startup, the US is still your best bet. Now let us realistically look at the scenario. Your chances of finding an opportunity in the United States is much higher than your possibility of getting a job followed by a green card in Australia, Canada, and other countries. Now, if you graduate from a university in any of these countries and you get a job, then your chances of settling down in that country are much higher than your chances of settling down in the US because of these immigration issues. In particular, if you were born in India. Now let's say you get a similar job in Canada and the US. Now let's be realistic once again. The salaries in the United States are way higher than all these countries. An average IT manager in the US can make around $150,000. However, in Canada, an IT manager on the higher end makes $117,000. Now, let us give them both an equal opportunity. Let's say for an argument that they both earn $100,000. Please remember that these are generic numbers. Individuals' cases are very different. Now, let's say you make $100,000 in Canada and you also get $100,000 in the US. How do these countries then compare? Now, because of the value of dollar in Canada, 100,000 Canadian dollars or 1 lakh Canadian dollars are equal to 72,000 American dollars. If you are making $100,000 in America and 100,000 Canadian dollars, you're already earning much higher. However, the taxes in Canada are higher than taxes in the US. Now, just for the sake of argument, let's say in both these countries, even taxes are absolutely similar. Let's say you paid 30% of your income in taxes and other expenses. After 30% tax deduction, in Canada, you get an equivalent of 50,000 US dollars in hand. Even though your salary was 100,000 Canadian dollars, in hand you get 50k US dollars. Now, as compared to that, in the US, you are making 70,000 US dollars. So clearly, you have a lead of $20,000 every year living in the United States, which means that in 5 years, the difference is your entire salary of $100,000. Now remember that in general, the cost of living in the United States is much lower than the cost of living in Canada. In Canada, you have just 5-6 big cities and the jobs are in those 5-6 big cities. It is not as widespread as the US is. So if you live in a cheaper state in the US, for example, if you live in Georgia, Texas, Colorado, Idaho, Ohio, you save a lot more than you could save living in Canada. In fact, even gas prices in Canada are way higher than in the US. And this situation is very similar across all these other countries. All these countries are more socialistic, therefore they charge higher taxes so that they can cover the healthcare facilities for all their citizens. In the US, however, your employer deducts your healthcare expenses. You are paying for your own healthcare, not for all the people in that country. So if you have insurance in the US, it is actually not that bad as people make it out to be. So in summary, the United States, let's be real, is the most powerful country in the whole world. You have far more to see and experience in the US than all these countries. Well, there is an exception that if you're in Germany or UK, you can travel to other European countries that you may not be able to do in the US. However, still, the US has far more to offer when it comes to opportunities after your graduation. Thank you for watching. Jai Hind, and may God bless the United States of America.